So this is what I saw today, and I had to do a double take. Tanya Plibersek, who is a senior member of the Australian Labor Party, calls for children to pledge allegiance to Australia. And this, by the way, is just before Invasion Day, or as others like to call it, Australia Day, the day that basically was the beginning of the genocide of First Nations people here in Australia. So there's two things that are appalling about that. That is, firstly, that Tanya Plibersek has done this on in just a day before Invasion Day, and then that she's done it at all. And I'm glad to see that there are many, many people in the comment section sort of basically poo-pooing the idea, strongly putting it down, including myself. Australians just are not into that kind of the sort of US quote-unquote patriotism, which is really just makes children cannon fodder for imperialist wars. And this makes me wonder what she's doing. It really does. And here's the pledge. It makes me wonder if they know something, if the US government has given them some kind of an indication that there might be some sort of war. And I'm talking about, of course, this war with Iran could happen, but I mean if there's been an affirmative on that there will be some sort of war in the next, year. I don't know. Anyway, the pledge, she says, "From this time forward, I pledge my loyalty to Australia and its people, whose democratic beliefs I share, whose rights and liberties I respect, and whose laws I will uphold and obey." Well, firstly, there are a lot of unjust laws made in Australia, as there is in any country. And I don't see why we should be indoctrinating children to be unquestioning bots that just follow along with whatever unjust laws there are. This is a great suggestion to indoctrinate children and make them non-thinkers that go ahead with whatever the government says is a good idea to do, and makes them non-thinkers in relation to other laws that come in. It's really appalling, actually. I mean, this is the sort of thing you might expect in the US, but here in Australia, we don't take kindly to this sort of thing, as you can see in the comment section. There's a lot of comments now, 818, and most of them, the replies to her, most of them are completely dismissing it. Then she goes on, "It's an elegant expression, this pledge, of what it takes to be a good citizen, of the rights we hold and the responsibilities we owe." Really? You have to take a pledge to be a good citizen? I mean, seriously, people are being, whatever that means, good citizens without doing these ridiculous sort of shallow pledges of patriotism. The way this government goes on, and I'm talking about both major parties, the way they behave is absolutely appalling. The Labor Party is absolutely hopeless now on the climate crisis. They still want to hang on to fossil fuels because they have no vision. They really don't care about the survival of this country or the world, because if they did, they would be doing their darndest to make sure that we get rid of our dependence on fossil fuels, and that we certainly aren't exporting coal and supporting the Adani coal mine up north in Queensland, which is a huge coal mine that was just started. We wouldn't be doing that. On top of that, we wouldn't be continuing on with ridiculous animal agriculture, because that's a major contributor to the climate crisis. Anyway, and then there's the way they treat asylum seekers. These asylum seekers are fleeing imperialist wars, Western imperialist wars, and the Labor Party and the Coalition, the major parties in Australia, basically are totally US lackeys. We are totally on board with any imperialist war that the US invites us to. And the Green Party are no better. They also are imperialists, and none of them have really done anything to help Julian Assange, so they're not for press freedom either. They do not believe in press freedom or democracy because they have abandoned a publisher journalist who is an Australian, and he will probably end up in prison they're going to put him away for 175 years, so it's a death sentence, and he's dying in Belmarsh prison. And I think it's like 3,000 doctors now have been pleading with the Australian government to do something to have him brought back home here to Australia, and they do nothing. They are a disgrace. So that is just a little example, and they're abandoning these asylum seekers and making money off them too, by the way, but abandoning them on these offshore detention centres, and these people are self-harming and are psychologically destroyed, many of them, and physically harming themselves because they're so distressed because they don't know when they're going to be able to get out. It's just indefinite detention. It's some sort of a punishment. And they make excuses, but the Labor Party helped bring in these awful asylum seeker detention laws. So I have no respect for either major party. I have no respect for the government here, which is a wannabe authoritarian government that wants to make nonviolent protests illegal. This is the sort of government. This is the sort of government we have right now. A government with a head of end-of-days believer who probably thinks it's God's will that we're having these apocalyptic fires in Australia, and he wants us to adapt to the climate crisis. He doesn't want to do anything about it. And he has been a climate change denier publicly up until the apocalyptic Australian fires recently. Then he feigned interest in it, and made out as if they've never been climate change deniers. Now he's wanting us to adapt to it rather than actually do anything. Adapt. What? To apocalyptic fires where everything burns down? Basically, he wants to get rid of these pesky forests and be damned with all the, billions and billions of animals, and make profit for his corporate buddies who will do something with the land now that these pesky Australian forests, 2 million, or it's a huge amount, millions and millions of acres of forests are now gone, and literally a billion animals plus, and trillions of insects perished in those fires. And all because, a lot of it because we're not vegan, because animal agriculture is a major driver of the climate crisis. But you won't even hear that from green groups, from the Greens, from any of these politicians. They just pretend like we can indefinitely go on with animal agriculture in a country where we're in a constant drought, and the drought is what is fueling it makes Australia a tinderbox, and this is how the climate crisis is manifesting in Australia. We're exploding into flames because we have ongoing droughts, which are never really going to end. They're only going to get worse. And so here we are guzzling so much water for animal agriculture. It takes 1,000 gallons to make 1 gallon of milk. It takes huge amounts of water to make for animals to use. And then there's all the other things. If you can look at the latest science, there's all the other issues with animal agriculture. So these are just tip of the iceberg things of what's wrong with government here. And what's wrong with most governments, really. Then she sort of goes on and says, patriotism, like mateship, is about solidarity. It's about what we owe each other as citizens. Holy crap. I mean, I don't even know what to say about that. It's disgusting. This is just indoctrination. This is a US BS is what this is. Look what happens to the US with all these poor people that are indoctrinated every day with this Pledge of Allegiance to their flag. All these children. And they end up, because the government is either a neoconservative, neoliberal government, warmongering, both big parties in the US are warmongers, these children end up cannon fodder for these awful politicians and oligarchs and corporations. And the weapons industry is cleaning up. The military-industrial complex is rubbing its hands together. And we are just a US lackey. We are just a vassal state for the US. They say jump and we say how high. And this politician is just like that. I'm wondering what's going on here, actually, for her to be making this suggestion. And the disgusting thing, too, is it's right before Invasion Day. It's just a spitting in the face of First Nations people. The fact that we even still have a day that's called Australia Day, which we celebrate, when it's the day that began the genocide of the first peoples in this country, is just disgraceful. So then, before that, then she said, patriotism. This is 25th of January 2020. Patriotism is the knowledge that we're not alone in this life, that our neighbours are there to share our struggles, that we have 25 million people in our corner when we need it. See, what does that mean? You know, this all sounds like the sort of thing that you say you try and drum up before there's a war somewhere. A war with China, a war with Iran. And it's also nonsense because I have neighbours that are fantastic here, thanks very much. And we don't need any silly pledge to make it that way. That's sort of, you know, this sort of thing eventually leads to sort of fascism and authoritarianism. It makes people mindless and obeying laws. Who wants to? Then she says, to love your country is not to assume it's better than others. Patriots don't need to feel superior to be proud, to feel proud. Well, it doesn't work like that. It actually makes people it makes children, it indoctrinates children to think that this is some kind of special country, meaning that we as Australians are somehow special and different from others. This is what they've done in the United States. American exceptionalism is a thing. And how did they get that way? Because they have done their nth degree, they have been relentless in their indoctrination of children. And when war comes, and it's coming all the time, endless war, there has hardly been any time since the beginning of the United States that they haven't been in war. Whether it's war on their Indigenous people, which is still ongoing, whether it's war on black people there because they're constantly trying to oppress them, constantly. And right from the beginning, that's how it was. Putting down uprising slaves. That's what the Second Amendment in the U.S. Constitution was created for. Putting down black slaves, uprising black slaves, and killing Indigenous people and stealing their land. George Washington used to use the stolen land and sell it off at a profit. These are the white supremacist founding fathers. So this sort of loving your country by drumming up patriotism through pledges that are dangerous, that children get indoctrinated by, is a sort of disgusting thing. Love your country is not to assume that it's perfect. Patriotism is not self-reflection and self-improvement. Holy crap, what is she on? And what does that actually mean to love your country? I'd like her to sort of explain what that means to, quote, love your country, end quote. That is a sort of a very, that phrase needs to be passed. She needs to explain what that means. You can be proud of your citizenship and dedicated to progress. You can cherish this nation and want to make it better. People don't need a pledge to be able to do that. You can be progressive and love your country. I certainly do. This is the so-called left. This is the so-called left of the Labor Party, the Australian Labor Party. How sad is that? I said a whole lot of things on the various tweets that she's made on this ridiculous suggestion. And I said one can love one's country, whatever that means to you, without parenting pledges designed to brainwash children and indoctrinate them to be cannon fodder in imperialist wars for oligarchs. Expecting a war with Iran, are we? Or China? So anyway, I think that's all she's basically said on this, which is plenty. So anyway, this is the opposition to the wannabe authoritarian government we have right now, Scott Morrison's government, who's trying to make nonviolent protests illegal. They're trying to basically take away whatever free healthcare we have by cuts and making public hospitals dysfunctional and not funding them properly, not using the sovereign economy like it's supposed to be used. Basically they want to make Australians so desperate for jobs that will do sort of slave labor. That's what they've done in the United States. They want to create a big prison industry, make people really poor, so then people start doing illegal things and end up in prisons, in private prisons, so that they can their mates that own the private prisons can make more profit on each individual prisoner. I mean, we're going down the path of the United States. That's what these idiots are doing. And people like Tanya Plibersek, who's supposed to be in the left section of the Labour Party, that's what she's doing here, and calling herself a progressive. You know, it's just disgusting. Anyway, I just had to put something out there for any Australian who sees this, and also for anti-imperialists who recognise this kind of talk. If you see this thread, please leave your thoughts about this on Tanya Plibersek's Twitter feed. It needs to be put down, and this gives you an idea of the sort of kind of useless politicians we have here in Australia, and they're really just imperialists at heart. All of them. And the only one that I knew of that wasn't was Scott Ludlam, and he was in the Green Party, and he left. But pretty much all of them are imperialists. Anyway, thanks very much for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Click the notifications bell, otherwise you won't receive notifications when I release a video. Thanks for watching. Till next time. Bye for now.